Well, on behalf of the Methodist Church of New Zealand, Te Hahi Waiteriana o Aotearoa, we bring greetings to the Trinity Methodist community at the East Coast-based Methodist Church on your 60th anniversary. We note the small beginnings of the church in 1958 and how it has grown to be what it stands for today. Over the past 60 years, your congregation has welcomed many people and nurtured them in their faith journey. Services have been held for people in their joyful as well as sorrowful events, and also the regular Sunday worships. And a continuing faith community in this place is a sign of a growing kingdom of God in serving people. So the partnership of this parish with the Methodist Mission and Ecumenical Board to assist and develop the hospital in Sassamunga in Solomon Islands is another step in the journey of the faith community. We wish the congregation God's blessings as you complete 60 years of Methodist presence and ministry in fulfilling God's mission here. May you continue to flourish in serving as you serve people, not only in your neighborhood, but also overseas. Best wishes and greetings. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dilys Davies and I'm the Auckland Area Superintendent. And I bring you greetings from the Auckland Synod. We extend our congratulations on 60 years of a Methodist presence here in East Coast Bays. We acknowledge the hard work and ministry of the lay people who have shown strong leadership, especially when you became a local shared ministry unit. We acknowledge the presbyters who have contributed to the life of ministry in this place. May God bless you as you continue your ministry in the East Coast Bays area. Thank you.
And the people of the congregation would like especially to send our greetings back to Te Hahi Waiteriana o Aotearoa and to the Auckland Synod. Prince, it has been the delight of this congregation to have become involved with the Sassamunga Hospital, an initiative that you started and have carried through with enormous dedication, and it's meant that here many people have an association with Solomon Islands ministry, but it's given us a focus which without your input would not have been possible. And to the Auckland Synod, Dilys, you and I served on that synod a very long time ago. When I was a synod superintendent, I think you were the area superintendent for West Auckland, or not long after. And the way in which the Methodist family can operate together is tremendously important to this congregation. It was little in the past. It's had its moments of being a bit bigger. It's not all that big at present, but it's still got a big heart. So from this congregation and all the presbyters that have been here, and also our deaconess, Edith Bowl, from a very, very long time ago, we wish both of you well in your ministries. So today's sermon, which is trying to place ourselves in a very wide context, was done yesterday in Peter Lineham's study, and Ian Faulkner and I asked him some questions, he asked us some questions, and we looked at a kind of history. Well, it wasn't just for the last 60 years, we went way back in New Zealand history. And when I put Peter's understanding alongside of the individual contributions that I pointed out in this bulletin and one or two others that are on the website, I think we begin to see something quite extraordinary, something that you wouldn't have picked. Now, pardon me, the oldest member of this congregation, no, I don't mean in terms of years of age, the oldest member who dates, I think, from the 1960, is Raywin Firkins. Wave your cane about, Raywin, so people can... Oh, okay. You were here in 1960, which was just 2.5 years after the building had opened. So you would have memories. Who was the first minister here? Norman Olds. You would remember Ray Sutcliffe. And talk about if you want to commandeer a car park, because when I became minister here, Ray was still alive and he still insisted on that was his car park, no one else's. Tremendous characters, most of whom have passed on, helped to build that hall. But you know, they did it in a kind of context that's a bit weird, or it seems weird. They were building the churches, Taharota Road, Campbell's Bay, Rothsey Bay, this one, against the backdrop of two things. First of all, the ecumenical movement. And so, the Anglicans and Presbyterians, being the dominant partners, chose the best locations. And the Methodists, according to Selwyn Dawson, got the thin end of the wedge. Originally, Takapuna Circuit bought 12 sections in order to put churches and church buildings throughout East Coast Bays. What a tremendous sense of vision. And Selwyn Dawson was the man driving that. There were a lot of squabbles about where these sections were located. Pardon me, but eventually they turned into the familiar locations that we know, and they were all given a message. They were built by Winston family, big building merchants in Auckland. They were built by Winston Bricks and Blocks. And the message was, you must make your church work because it will be the bulwark against communism. Well, in the 1950s, that was true. The Cold War was in its height. Actually, as Peter Lineham reminded us, there'd been a fear of Russia in early settler New Zealand way back in the 1880s, 1870s. So it got repeated in the 50s. But soon, that fear of communism was giving rise to a new phenomenon, Beatlemania, and a whole lot of protest songs. Ian Faulkner, can you tell me some of the singers of those protest songs?
Joan Blaze, Peter, Paul and Mary,
Bob Dylan. Yeah. And Dave Hallam was there.
I wasn't there.
Jimi Hendrix is next decade. 50s, 60s, yeah, 70s. During the course of the sermon, Dave may suddenly improvise a Jimi Hendrix chord if he doesn't like something I say. Yeah. All right? Wasn't your music? No, a very skilled jazz musician is Dave. That had an influence on churches. Those protest songs, we all can remember, this land is your land. But it also had an effect in terms of the charismatic movement, which was bursting onto the Methodist scene in the 60s and 70s. And so you have this tremendous movement in music, but you've also got an emerging theology, the death of God theology, which is typified by Bishop John Robinson. Can you remember Honest to God? Yeah, some of you can. And there were protests in the next decade. We, as Methodists, we protested sometimes on left-wing causes, sometimes on right-wing causes. There have been at least 2 MPs through this church. One ex-MP sitting here now, Dale Jones, like to identify, wave your stick. And can you remember Patricia Schnau, who was one of the first ACT MPs and the daughter of Ella Oldfield, who was the only church member, as far as I'm aware, to live to 100. And she got up and stood where I'm standing a few weeks after her 100th birthday and spoke to this church. What an amazing woman she was. Then we got a bit of a social conscience in New Zealand around the time of the rugby tours and the protests. And I was a theological student. I just exited the year that they protested in Hamilton. And theological students were amongst the primary protesters that invaded the pitch. Oh, is it called a pitch in rugby? Yeah. Anyway, we all know what happened. But here's the key thing. The decade after that, we suddenly became aware in Trinity-at-Waiake of our own inherent Pākehā racism. It was all very well protesting it way out there in a country thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away, but our record in terms of a bicultural society was sadly lacking, and is also a bicultural church. So throughout the zine, you're going to see lots of references to Māori. And some of the Māori symbols symbolise friendship. And that was the founding principle of the bicultural journey. Respect and friendship. And after that we had the 90s, where there were massive kinds of influx movements. Feminism, the gay rights issue, multiculturalism suddenly became a feature of Methodist churches. And there was a split in Tahahi. And a good number of presbyters and a good number of lay people walked out over the gay issue. But for those of us who remained, we actually felt that theologically, spiritually, and emotionally, we were doing the Christian thing. And even today, one of the leaders of the people that walked, the group that walked out, Richard Waugh, who's a very close friend of mine, Richard said of all the issues, he personally felt he got that wrong. Which brings me to these bits of equipment. What are they doing here in the church? I was looking for a barbecue, and I thought we were going to have a sausage sizzle afterwards. Alison brought us this barbecue. It's one that Peter had during the last year of his life. Peter Lineham was a parish steward here for a very long time, key member of the congregation, great singer. And in that last year of his life, it wasn't so much that he wanted the meat to barbecue, he wanted the smell of the smoke. And that was very much a part of something he cherished. it reminded me of Graham Constable's contribution, which is on the website. Graham Constable comes from a family where Methodists came in the original settlerships, and poor blighters, they settled down in Otago and Southland. Not exactly the paradise that was promised in the literature back in England. Anyway, Graham eventually moved up to Wellington, strong, staunch Methodist background and family, and he came here to the Bays. And what was it that got him out of the Brethren Church up at North Cross? It was Shirley Scott barbecuing sausages on a sausage sizzle, fundraising for the new building. I tell you, there's been more spiritual power and fellowship in a barbecue than you'll find in a lot of study groups that go on. There have been some other notable Methodist families as well. Colleen McNay, who's mentioned in the zine. Colleen, along with Deaconess Edith Bowl, or she was originally Beer, Deaconess Beer, were part of the Rothsey Bay congregation. It broke all our hearts to have to close that building because block by block, Edith Bowl and her husband had built it. But who should lead the combined group in but this 80-plus-year-old lady, and Colleen not far behind, just a few people that came from Rothsey Bay Methodist and helped to populate this new building. Absolutely marvellous contribution. But she comes from Methodist stock that goes way, 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 way back as well. Originally, your forebears were the first Methodist settlers at Devonport. I didn't know Margaret Sharp would be here, but I think you've got a long Methodist heritage down in Invercargill, haven't you? Yeah. I noticed that all the people from Invercargill eventually come north. Margaret was also, along with Shirley and Elizabeth Faulkner and a whole lot of others, they were fundraisers for the church, and you know all about that. Yeah. We also had the protests not long after we opened this building because people didn't want a cell phone tower. You can read about that in the zine. Now they can't get enough of the signals. You know, times change. And finally, the last thing. Some of you will remember Hannes and Hetty Waiake. They're still members of this congregation. But they live over in West Auckland and they look after their autistic grandson, always on a Sunday. Hannes brought, for me, this old risograph. During my ministry here, we had a risograph like this. It had a computer interface, and we outputted, as a congregation, thousands and thousands of books. Adam and Eve and Evolution, John Wesley Among the Scientists. We did the first lead worship books long before I was a resource person down in Wellington. We outputted them and built those books by hand. And I can remember looking around, there were teams of people that had to walk around the table assembling all of these books. And Max Thompson, who became the expert with the glue gun and bound them together. Well, yes, times have changed. Technology means we deliver our message differently now. And Stuart McAdam helps tremendously with our Facebook presence. What? We've got about 30,000 followers. We can distribute a zine at the drop of the hat. But guess what? Sometimes technology fails. And maybe I had a premonition. But I thought, well, I'm not going to have the technology beat us on our anniversary day. So I made a zine. And it's all produced by hand from this. Oh, there you go. You got the exercise. That's your. You know, the message, it's got to go out in multiple ways. Face-to-face round fellowship, or the printed word, or on your phone, doesn't matter how it gets out, it's just got to go out. That's what Methodism has always been about. So, thank you, everyone. And if you weren't mentioned by name, I'm sorry, but I believe each of you has made an outstanding contribution.